はい、ひらがなパート7を一緒に勉強しましょう. This time we're dealing with diacritics, which means essentially accent marks. There are different little things that we can attach to characters, like this ten right here, or this little maru right here. In the background, you can say this is called Chi no Ike, or Blood Pond, which is in Beppu in Oita Prefecture. You cannot actually swim in this. It is far, far, far too hot. It would be very, very dangerous. It's near boiling temperature. But yes, it is a beautiful place to visit, and the hot springs around it are its actual attraction. では, so, first of all, I want to sort of explain a concept called voicing. Try, if you will, to touch your voice box. For men, that's often called your Adam's apple, but it's the part of your throat where you can feel it moving when you speak. If you touch it or hold it and you just say "s," you probably feel nothing. Now, if you say "z" on the other hand while you're doing this, you can probably feel vibrations. Those vibrations are called voicing. So if you go "s," you get nothing, "z," and you can feel it kind of buzzing. That buzzing is voicing, and that voicing is what we represent with our diacritic. So we add voicing to sounds by adding ten to them like this little ten. So two dots that are attached to the character in the top right of it, and they go down to the right like this. So they're not like this or like whatever. They're not like this. Kore dame desu. We only write the ten in this way. All right, but we add them in order to add voicing to it. So instead of su, this would be zu, zu, and so on and so forth. For we have ta, ta. If I add ten to that, it ends up as da, da, da. And then here as well for k, if I add ten to k, I go from ko to go, ko, go. So the vowel never changes. The vowel is always the same. In this case, we have just u, and it's still u, it's still a, o, it's still o. The vowel is completely unaffected by whether there is ten or not. All that we're doing is voicing the consonant in there. So suzu, tada, kogo. All right. Now, if we look at the whole list of the ka row, we can see ka to ga, ki to gi, ki, gi. Now notice that this is gi. Some people think that, oh yeah, gi, and so then I read that as G or something, as in giraffe. You never do. Remember, Japanese, do not think of how English spells things. That's not relevant for Japanese in general. This is a gi as in something that you would wear in a karate match or something. This is how we would write it. Gi as in gift, and that's the only way we pronounce it. This character is pronounced the same way every single time we see it. Ku is gu, ku, gu. Same thing for here, ke to ge. So again, people think, oh, ge, and therefore ja or je, like gem or something, but it is not. It is only the ge as in get, and that is the only way I can pronounce this character. So ge, ge. And then finally kogo, which we've already seen. So that's the ka row. What about the sa, ta? Now we know that there's a couple of sounds that are already kind of tricky, so let's just first of all deal with the ones that aren't. So sa, se, so become za, ze, zo. Ta, te, to become da, de, do. These other two sounds are a little bit more tricky, but instead of z doesn't exist as a sound. Instead, we pronounce this as ji, ji, here. And then z is z. That's normal, but then this one as well is pronounced the same way in modern day Japanese. So this one also is pronounced zu. So these sounds, these four sounds here, have changed quite a bit over time in Japanese. It used to be the case that ji and this one, ji, were pronounced differently, but nowadays we pronounce these the same way. So these are both just ji. And then these two here, z and z, used to be pronounced differently. They are now just z. So for ja sounds, when we want to say a ja sound in Japanese, essentially our only option nowadays is going to be ji. And for z sounds, essentially, at least in first year Japanese, our only option is going to be zu. So when we say write zu, we will never mean write this one with tsu with ten unless I bring it up. So it would have to be in a person's first first or last name, or in a couple of rare words, but they will not come up in our first year Japanese vocabulary. Now, interestingly, this still varies by region. So you can see right here, actually, in some parts of the country, in the local dialect, this is not in standard Japanese, but in the local dialect of the green part of the country, actually all four of these are pronounced the same way. In Tokyo, so this yellow part includes both Tokyo, which is right here, or Osaka and Kyoto and a bunch of other places. The major cities, these are pronounced ji, and then zu. So those are two different pronunciations. In some other regions, though, and especially in the south of the country, sometimes all four of these are pronounced differently in the local dialect. But in standard Japanese, we have jiji, zuzu. All right, so that's that. What about H? So H and voicing. The short version is just to sort of memorize it. If we have ha, hi, fu, he, ho, then if we add ten, we say ba, bi, bu, be, bo. And if we add maru, we say pa, bi, bu, be, bo. So H plus ten is a B, and H plus maru is a P. So ha, hi, fu, he, ho, ba, bi, bu, be, bo, pa, bi, bu, be, bo. And if you just want to remember it that way, then that's totally fine. Go for it. You don't need to know anything else, and you can skip the next minute of this video. But for people who are like, what is going on there? Why would you ever do that? That's not a voicing distinction. Well, historically, what we write now as ha was originally pronounced pa, actually. So Japanese didn't have an H sound back in the 700s or so. That's whatever, 1300 and some odd years ago. But then we didn't pronounce it ha, we pronounced it pa. And a voiced P is in fact a B, so this would have made sense. Pa, pi, pu, pe, po, to ba, bi, bu, be, bo. That would have made sense. But what happened historically is people stopped closing their lips the whole way when they were pronouncing a P sound. So if you try and say pa, but then you kind of like only halfway sort of close your lips, you end up with something that sounds, well, we write it in linguistics like this, but something like pa, and then eventually if your lips are just kind of close together, fa, and if you open them even further, aha. So that's essentially what happened to P. P kind of got changed into H over time because people opened their mouth and didn't close their lips all the way when they said P, and then that became fashionable, and then that just became the language. That became how you pronounce it. F is our one exception because U, the vowel U, keeps our lips close together. Already. So our lips don't separate like they do for like open your mouth and say right? But you don't open your mouth and say That's not a thing that you can do. So instead, your lips are already close, and that's why still today, instead of saying who, we say fu with this sound here, that fu sound. Now, that's how P kind of left the language. So what originally was pa-ba now ends up looking like ha-ba. And that's how we pronounce it now. But P sounds still existed in things like, so onomatopoeia means sound words. So like pika pika means shining. And then there was a few other words that came back into the language. Then we had a bunch of new words that were borrowed from Chinese, and those Chinese words had a P sound in it. So we needed some way to write them. And they invented a new character, which was this, they call it handakuten in Japanese, but it's maru also. We can just say maru like circle or o. And that became how we wrote this once extinct sound, or at least one sound that at one time had kind of gone on its way out. We needed a way to write a comeback for it. So that's what's going on here. But if we summarize all of what happened in modern Japanese now, if we don't care about the history of it, if we just want to say what does Japanese look like in 2020, we get these 5 rows. So we have ga, gi, gu, ge, go, ga, gi, gu, ge, go, with what I call Z, what you probably call Z, is za, ji, zu, ze, zo, za, ji, zu, ze, zo, with D, da, ji, zu, ze, zo, again, da, ji, zu, de, do, But again, we don't really use ji or zu in modern Japanese very often. That only happens when something that was originally chi or tsu gets voiced because it's added to something. So say, for example, hana means nose, chi means blood. So hanaji is a nosebleed. And then we write the ji as chi with ten. But for the most part, this doesn't really occur. If you want to write the ji sound, we write it this way. And if we want to write the zu sound, we write it this way for exactly the same process. We have our B row, ba bi bu be bo, and then finally our P row, pa pi pu pe po. Pa pi pu pe po. So those are the full list of sort of enhanced characters that have those accent marks on them, these diacritics. So I will call them in class, I will say ten or maru to talk about these different diacritic marks. But obviously, they make a difference in what word it is. So careful as you're writing out your characters to make sure that you have them when you need them and that you don't when you don't. では、次は contracted sounds, the last sort of extension to hiragana.